Yes, when you read the Bible, it's obviously a very long book and sometimes very confusing book. And a very common question is, well, hold on a second. Are we really following all the parts of the Bible? Aren't there parts in the Old Testament in particular that seem like they're out of date and they no longer apply? And if we're not willing to follow those parts, then why do we think we should follow other parts? This is a common question people often bring up. So they're thinking, well, in the modern day, you eat whatever food you want, but you couldn't do that in the Old Testament. In the modern day, you don't worry about, impurity laws and rules like this. You don't worry about eating certain kinds of animals and not others, or mixing fabrics together. And in the modern day, you certainly don't have animal sacrifices anymore. So what's the deal here? Are we just picking and choosing what we want to follow in the Bible? Well, actually, no. Believe it or not, historians and theologians have actually thought through this quite carefully. For generations, Christians have not just picked and choose, but have thought very carefully about why parts of the Bible still apply and others don't. And I can promise you, it's not just because we pick the parts we like and then don't follow the other parts we don't like, but there's actually a very clear rationale for why certain parts no longer apply. And that rationale comes from the Bible itself. I'll give you a good example of this, and that is just take the example of animal sacrifices. Throughout the Old Testament, God was very keen to make sure his people did it. They went to a particular location to do it. They built a place called the tabernacle, which eventually became the temple, and that's where they did it. And all that mattered to God. But what you realize is that what Christianity teaches is that all that was provisional. It was anticipatory of some other greater reality. In other words, it was a foreshadowing of something greater to come. What was that greater thing? Well, the person of Jesus. Once he came, he was our perfect sacrifice. We don't need animal sacrifices. He is the ultimate temple. He's the dwelling of God with human beings. And so you can realize those things are no longer applicable, not because they were wrong or not because they're sinful, but because, in fact, they are fulfilled in Jesus. Now, other parts of the Old Testament still do apply. So, for example, what we call the moral law, sort of the core ethics of how to live, which are embodied in the Ten Commandments, for example, those would obviously still apply because Jesus affirmed those. The New Testament writers affirm those. But they also acknowledge that things like ceremonial laws and food laws and sacrificial laws are completed and fulfilled in Christ. And so, yeah, there's no pick and choosing going on here. It's just a matter of following the Bible's own guidance on how God reveals himself throughout history. And we want to be in the place where God's ultimate revelation is in Jesus. And the provisional parts, obviously, therefore, no longer apply today.